Hello and welcome to this special presentation where I paint a backdrop for your photography of your miniatures and setups and battle reports and whatever it might be. Just as a hobby, I really enjoy doing this whole process, and today I'm going to show you how to do it. So this is just a bit of plywood really, with a laminated side on it. It's very cheap, you can get it from the hardware store. It doesn't cost more than a couple of dollars per sheet. Here are the materials that I'll be using. The stuff I got from Daiso, which is just a Japanese retailer that sells, $1 goods basically. I bought some acrylic paint from there, some brushes, which are just synthetic brushes from Daiso as well. And the most expensive thing probably is the rattle can. It's a Liquitex branded acrylic sprays, which they do a whole range of colors, which are really nice actually to use for terrain purposes. So I bought that to make a Man of War board in the past, but I thought I might use that to spray up the board actually at some point, just to give me a nice bit of coverage and to start off with the sky and that kind of thing, and give that a try. So a lot of this stuff is pretty experimental still. It's not like that I know exactly what I'm going to do or how I'm going to do it. I've got an idea. Let's get my paints and materials out and just see how I'm going to go through the whole process step by step. I've got some sponge there which I might use in this particular tutorial. Had not used that before, so I'll give that a try and see how that works out. But let's go now to the next step. So I went outside, I grabbed the rattle can and I just sprayed whatever was left. I had a very, very small amount of paint left in there, which actually worked to my benefit because I left all these sort of white patches, which was going to form into our clouds. But we still need a lot more work here to try to sort of merge the colors together, soften that blue, that really dark blue a lot. Of course, you could do this with an airbrush if you had an airbrush as well. Or you could do this just by hand using paints, with acrylic paints and a brush, or acrylic with oil paints of course as well. So now we're going to add the skyline. I'm actually going to use that sponge. I've just mixed some white and blue paint on my palette, and I'm just going to dab that into the paint, and I'm actually just going to directly dab that straight onto the painting. So we're sort of just merging those two colors in and trying to form some kind of a skyline here with some clouds and some blue sky, but I just wanted to just fix up a lot of the paint sort of spluttered and had all these spots everywhere on the board, so I want to clean all that up and basically sort of just blend it through, just step by step. So this will take quite some time. It won't be an easy and straightforward process, but it will take time just to sort of sit back, see how you're going, and sort of just take it step by step. And as you can see here, I'm going through and just sort of dabbling in the paint and trying to fix it all up and trying to correct it and trying to make something that looks like a sky. Look, it may not look perfect, but again, it's all part of that sort of learning curve, like with anything. So whenever you start something new, it's going to take some time to adjust. I want to make sure that the skyline itself doesn't look too cartoonish, you know what I mean? You see sometimes people paint backdrops when they've got these perfect sort of formed clouds and everything like that. I don't want to see that at all. I want to see a very impressionistic style of painting here. So really it's, you can just sort of, like what I'm doing here, is sort of just placing down areas of paint where I think the clouds would form, and then not being too precise about it, sort of just dabbling in the paint as I see fit, and sort of making it a very irregular sort of shape as I go along. So that's basically where we should be at now. And it's acrylic paint, so it's going to dry pretty fast, so you can work between layers. I'm just going to work on this section now, and then I'll work onto the other section in just a moment. Okay, so again, sort of just following through that process of adding the clouds using the sponge, and as the paint dries, the white sort of softens in color, and maybe you want to add a couple of layers of that white just to give more of a more of a saturated effect with the white to make it stand out a little bit more. And you can go back with the light blue if you want to correct anything, or change the shape and that kind of thing as well. Here's kind of an overview of what I've been working on so far. You can see this sort of light blue in the bottom of the painting too. That's kind of where I've got a brush and I've sort of just started brushing in the sky. And I sort of want to create this band across the painting pretty much to the halfway mark where I want this skyline to be. Now I often make the mistake, especially with the last one I did, is that I put the skyline a bit too high up on the board, and it sort of cut out the clouds. And I think this one I'm going to do the same. I'll sort of be cutting out the clouds, which is not a big thing. It's not a major thing. Is this that maybe, and it's good to have like a high board because you don't want it too not wide enough or not high enough, I should say, that it will won't fit your photography, depending on the pieces that you're taking photographs of. So if it's a big wide battle scene where you need quite a lot of room and space to fit all the terrain and models in, so you want a good sized board. So from here I'm just sort of dabbling in some more colour, blending it through, just using the sponge as a brush really, and I really enjoyed using the sponge, so more so than the brush. But yeah, I mean it's got its uses definitely for making sort of less formed objects on a painting. So if you're looking for a very irregular sort of pattern or something like that, I think sponges are great. So this is just something I got out of my transport cases that I had left over, and it's worked a charm really. And I'm sure foam has a lot more uses in painting for this kind of thing, and I'll try to experiment more with that. But this gives me a pretty good basis for a skyline here, the clouds and that kind of thing, but we can always go back later to address things if we need be. Now we come to the foreground of the painting, and I've just got some cheap paint from Daiso. It's not very expensive at all. It's like just $1 a pot, and I'm just using that with the sponge, and I'm just going to brush on and cover as much as that foreground as I can with it. And we're going to add some more layers on top of that, but it'll take a good 2-3 layers to cover everything, but it seems to be applying well enough. I've given it a good shake. So a lot of those cheap paints, pigments are very low, so they're usually not the best to use generally, but this is not too bad. And I thought I'd just put in I sort of just dot in a tree line, and that's what I'm really looking for in this painting, is that I just want a nice sort of a colourful green, sort of greenish yellow foreground with all the trees and hills and fields and that kind of thing, and then some like a nice blue, light blue skyline. So painting the tree line in, I'm just using the sponge again. I found it's really cool, like for doing things like pine trees or birch trees or anything like that. It gives a nice sort of form just using the sort of the edge of the foam. But again, you could use that with a brush easily enough, no problem at all. I just found the sponge so useful as a tool to paint with that I thought I might as well just try to keep going with the brush and see how I go. I can get a lot of coverage on with a minimal amount of paint, even though it does soak up a fair bit, but it's still applying really well in the areas that I want it to do. So yeah, it's worked out quite a charm, really. Now we come to the bit more technical stuff, and basically it's going to add this atmospheric perspective. If you look into a landscape, or you look at any sort of scenic scene in the distance, you'll see that things are sort of not so clear, and the foreground you can see the colours very clearly, but in the distance things become sort of this hazy sort of greyish colour in the background. So that's that kind of atmospheric perspective we want to try to achieve in our paintings as well. It just makes the paintings look a bit more realistic, and so I've just added basically some, as you can see on the sponge, it's basically a grey. So you can use like a blue grey, you can use like a black-white grey, it doesn't really matter. Just add that into the green and then sort of apply that to the sort of the background of the picture. You can paint in some trees in the distance, smaller trees in the background or larger trees or whatever, keeping the foreground sort of more darker, so you've got that sort of graduation in distance, giving that illusion that trees are in the background and foreground. And I've sort of started trying to put the foreground with adding some more color, just forming the hill shapes and that kind of thing. I do think the hills are a bit too high here in this picture, you know, sort of in retrospect, but you know, that's okay. It's not such a big problem. So yeah, but I always kind of paint my paintings so they're sort of too far up, too high up, and you'll see the end result anyway when we have like where we can see like a picture with the miniatures and terrain on there. So maybe I've got my sort of horizon line too high up basically. So that's something to take note of. But yeah, just keep applying that green. Make sure that the foreground is all covered with a good layer of green paint, and we should be ready to go to the next step. Okay, now I've actually added some burnt umber to my palette just from one of my model color Vallejo paints here. You don't need that much, and that's the good thing about, you know, this. You think you need tons and tons of paint. You really don't, actually. So I get by just using some of my miniature paints that I use for doing a lot of this stuff as well. But for the main colors like the greens and the blues and whites, you probably need some acrylic paints just for that. So I've just added that burnt umber because I want to give more depth to the base of the tree lines and that kind of thing. So even though I'm not physically painting in the stumps or anything like that for the trees, I want to give this sort of feeling that, you know, there's sort of darkness around the base of the trees and that kind of thing within the foliage of the trees. So that's where we're up to now. So now I've just got some ochre. I've got so many paints of ochre here. I don't know why, I just keep reordering paints with ochre in it, forgetting that I had some. So I put ochre in with the green paint that I was using as a base color for the fields. Just mix it up with a brush, and I'm going to just paint that straight onto the painting. Okay, so as you can see here, painting progress so far doesn't look too bad. It's started to form up a little bit more. And again, this is going to be a long process, so don't be too disheartened if you can't see instant results. You just got to work with it basically, and just take each step as it goes. So I'm pretty happy with it so far, even though the hills are way too high, but that's okay. It's going to be just a learning curve at this stage. Okay, so here I'm sort of forming the hills more and more, adding a bit more brown to the green, and then sort of placing that in sort of the gully of where the two hills join, just to give it a bit more shape and that kind of thing. Keeping more ochre in your green at the very top, so it's giving sort of the light where the sun would shine on the top of the hill. Transition that into the greens around the hill, giving it shape and that kind of thing, which is not too easy, but see how you go. You can use a sponge if you need to. So now we're going to do a bit more technical work, a bit more sort of lining in just with our paintbrush here, and sort of forming the tops of those sort of these very tall pine trees at the background. They were going to be like originally deciduous trees like they have for the K&M range, so there's nice and round form shaped trees, but I like the idea of the pine trees, and it sort of just worked out that way. So I thought I'd just keep going with it and see how it went. But yeah, I think it looks really cool. I do need to pick up some more of those KM trees, the pine trees as well, so they look really, really nice. But so far, fairly happy with how it's progressing. Sort of just taking it step by step, giving it some time to dry, going back and just painting my miniatures for a bit, and then coming back to it, having a look at it, and seeing what I can do next to it. So yeah, so far so good. Now we come to the atmospheric perspective on the trees. So basically I've just watered down some of that blue-grey or grey into some of the green and just made a very, very thinned out mixture on my palette, and I'm sort of just brushing that over just very, very thinly over the areas that I want to cover on the trees, and that will give you this sort of nice yeah, sort of greyish, like almost like a mist to the background of the painting. And now you can see I've actually gone over the blue. We're going to correct that with an airbrush later, because I do have an airbrush, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it's an absolute pain in the butt to get going, but yeah, we'll use an airbrush to fix up and correct some patchy areas there, and sort of bring it all in together. But yeah, that looks a lot better to me already at this stage. Okay, now we're at the final stages here. We've got an airbrush and we're going to start fixing up a lot of that skyline. I want that more lighter, so I've just got some like a light grey. I think it's Space Wolf grey that I'm using from Vallejo Game Color. It's a really, really light grey, and I'm just going to use that to not only patch up the areas that are green on the skyline, but also I'm actually going to go over some of the tree lines as well, just so that they look more like they're in the background kind of thing. So it's basically just that process of lightly layering some paint in the areas on the very tops of the tree lines and that kind of thing, and making them look further into the distance. And I'll also patch up some of the skyline as well, because there's some areas there where the clouds are that I'm not 100% happy with, so I want to go over those as well. And the airbrush is just a fantastic tool. I mean, if you don't have access to one, I mean, it's not the end of the world. I mean, you can do that with a brush and sort of just gradually build up some thin layers here and there of very thinned out paint to create this kind of atmospheric perspective. But having the airbrush does definitely make a big difference in, you know, getting quite a complex technique finished in a very short amount of time. So that's basically what I'm doing. I'm sort of just fixing up any areas that I need sort of tidying up, using that grey to fix up a lot of that. And yeah, I'm sort of liking the results so far, and I hope if you're painting along with me like in a Bob Ross video, I hope these results are working out for you too, guys. Now for the foreground, I'm actually just got some goblin green in my brush now. I'm sort of just patching up some areas. I did have an accident with this painting, sadly. I was actually cleaning up my airbrush with some paint stripper, and when I opened up the canister, the paint stripper sort of spilled out and splashed onto the painting, like about 3 droplets, which is really clumsy of me. And so now I'm trying to patch it up and fix it up. It didn't really fix it up entirely, because once you get like spots like that, it's just really hard to try to cover it up again. So if you're ever wondering why there's some kind of like hill or tower or building in front of that area on this, you know, the right hand side of the painting, that's why. It's because those 3 droplets on there. But it's just my fault for not, you know, getting it out of the way before mucking around with that kind of stuff. And here we have it. That's the end of our tutorial. There's our backdrop with our lovely scenery and miniatures in the foreground. And I hope you enjoyed it, guys. Please leave comments below to tell me what you think. And thanks again for watching. Take care.